the childhood of God. Every year at Christmas, I try to get into the spirit so well described by Ebenezer Scrooge's unnamed nephew at the beginning of Dickens's A Christmas Carol. I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on another journey. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. Dickens was a Unitarian in sentiment. He attended Unitarian chapels in London and hung out with Emerson and Longfellow on a visit to Massachusetts just before he wrote this great work. And this idea that apart from the veneration of the Christ child, the season worked a change in spirit is very Unitarian and is driven home in the unforgettable transformation wrought on Scrooge by the ghosts that come to visit him in his troubled night. Dickens' story represents the last of three layers of ideas about Christmas. The oldest layer is a celebration of medieval Europe with religious pomp and ceremony among the wealthy and drunkenness and revelry among the commoners. The Puritans revolted against this, and they brought this revulsion to the regime they set up in America. Every day was the same as every other day in Puritan New England. In Massachusetts, celebration of Christmas was actually illegal for many years, and most businesses did not close on Christmas Day, and governing bodies were often in session on Christmas Day. Then there was a revolt against this state of affairs, a movement to have Christmas declared a holiday in the 1820s, which was led by Unitarians and Universalists in Massachusetts. In New York, a group of conservative Episcopalians called the Knickerbockers took the lead in trying to reinvent the holiday with a featured role for St. Nicholas, reimagined as a Dutch figure. This crystallized in Clement Moore's A Night Before Christmas, which cemented the figure of Santa Claus as a distributor of presents and made children in the home, rather than revelry in the streets, the reason for the season. This is what I call the mainstream of Christmas. And to this 19th century base, the commercial state of the 20th century added mass advertising to give us the retail and cultural behemoth that we have come to love and loathe at the same time. And one of the ways that I have of coping with the relentless tinsel of this time of year is to do some archaeology into alternative ideas about Jesus. I find it fascinating how differently people thought about Jesus in ages gone by. Here's an English song which was recorded in the 1950s by a folklorist named A.L. Lloyd, but was collected by Ralph Vaughan Williams in villages in Herefordshire and Shropshire in 1905. I learned it from the singing of two of my favorite repositories of odd English folklore, John Roberts and Tony Barron. It's called The Bitter Withy. A withy is a willow branch. As it fell out on a high holiday, small rain from the sky did fall, and Mary asked our Savior asked her own mother dear if he might play at ball. To play, dear child, she did say, it's time that you must be gone. And don't let me hear complaints about you at night when you do come home. Our Savior went out into yonder town, as far as the holy well, and there he met three of the finest children, as ever any tongue could tell. good morn, said they. Good morning, then, said he. And which of you 3 jolly children will play at ball with me? Oh, we are lords and ladies' sons, born in a bowery hall. And you are but a poor maid's child, born in an oxen stall. Our Savior made a bridge with the beams of the sun, and over the water strode he. And the 3 children followed after him, but drowned they were all 3. Then upward fall and downward fall, their mothers they did wall and squall, saying, Mary, mild, take home your child, for ours are drowned all. And Mary took a handful of withies and spread out a Savior across her knee. And with a handful of bitter withy twigs, she gave him slashes 3. Then cursed be the bitter withy that caused him to smart, and it shall be the very first tree to perish right out of the heart. So, weird enough for you? Did you get that? Here's Jesus the kid who wants to go out to the neighborhood and play some ball. That's what kids did before they had video games. His mother says, go ahead, but don't get anyone riled up. Don't let him hear any complaints about you. So Jesus sees 3 fine lads in the village by the well and invites them to play ball. But they pull rank on him. They respond that they are of noble birth, and so they can't be caught dead playing ball with someone who was born in an oxen stall. So Jesus gets revenge for this snub. Using his magic powers, he builds a bridge out of the beams of light from the sun, and he walks across the water on it. But the 3 boys follow after him and are drowned. Their mothers complain to Mary about this, and Mary responds by giving Jesus 3 slashes with the willow branch. This administering of punishment, however, results in a curse being placed on the willow. Where's the morality in this? We have no idea how old this song is, but it shows a definite political viewpoint. The society is obviously class stratified, and class snobbery is the order of the day, even among children. Jesus is kind of a lower class champion, because the noble boys take him to be powerless, but he actually has magical powers that turns the tables on them fatally. Now his mother makes an effort to discipline him, but even that goes awry as the little branch which she uses to spank him gets cursed. What would you do if you were the mother of God? How would you raise it? You see, it's one of the wonders of Christmas from the point of view of Christian orthodoxy to contemplate God, the most powerful being in the universe, as an infant, which is the very epitome of powerlessness. Most of us today don't go too far with that thought. It's shielded behind the haze of sentimentality and the bright things that distract us at this season. But people have thought about it down through the ages. There's another Christmas song in English and American folklore called the Cherry Tree Carol, which Jacqueline has played for us on the piano now. The story of this is that when Mary is pregnant, but Joseph doesn't know it, she and Joseph are walking in a cherry grove, and Mary asks Joseph to pick her a cherry because she is with child. Joseph is upset at this news because he knows that he has not slept with her, and angrily tells her to have the father of her child pick the cherries for her. At this, Jesus in the womb commands the cherry tree to bend down so Mary could pick a cherry. And Joseph realizes he's been dealing with something very powerful and apologizes. There's another version of this story in the Quran, of all places, but instead of cherries, it's a date tree. This is even weirder than giving a child supernatural powers. This is giving those powers to the fetus in the womb. It hardly needs mention that the ability of a newborn baby to act is restricted to satisfying its own most basic urges and complaining when it needs to. A newborn formulates no plans, makes no friends or enemies, does not reward or punish, knows no good or evil. That's the whole point of a newborn. And while the innocence of Jesus, the newborn, is such a staple of our current child-centered view of Christmas, and a fetus has even less range of action. Social historians tell us that the very notion we have of childhood is only a couple of hundred years old. The child-centered Christmas began about the same time that people in the West began recognizing childhood as a distinctive age and protecting children during those years. Before that time, children were considered sort of inferior adults. Now, in the Gospel accounts in the New Testament, there's very little about the childhood of Jesus. Mark's Gospel, probably the first written, starts with Jesus' baptism at age 30, at the beginning of his public ministry. John's Gospel starts with the general Platonic mystery of God's incarnation in Jesus, but tacks it back to the beginning of time, not to any event in Jesus' lifetime. Only Matthew and Luke have stories of Jesus' infancy, the stories we read in our churches on Christmas Eve, concerning the shepherds and angels in Luke, and the visit of the Magi in Matthew. But in both of these accounts, Jesus, the newborn baby, has a passive role. He lies in the manger, Luke, or in an unspecified place in Matthew. He has no speaking role. After all, he's the newborn. He does get to undergo circumcision to complete his identity as a Jew. The only account of Jesus' childhood in the New Testament are two related stories in Luke, of which I've read the second one just now. Both involve the temple in Jerusalem, the seat of Jewish priestly worship, which was believed to be the residence of God on earth. In the first story, Jesus is brought to the temple as a young child because he is the firstborn son, and under Mosaic law, this requires a special sacrifice. But there was a righteous and devout man named Simeon in Jerusalem, and he was very old, but the Holy Spirit had told him he would not die before he had seen the Messiah. When Jesus was brought into the temple, Simeon took the child in his arm and sang a song which we sing a lot in Christian churches today called Nunc Dimittis. Now let me depart in peace, for my eyes have seen thy salvation. The second story occurs later when Jesus was 12. His parents journeyed to Jerusalem from Nazareth for Passover. When the festival was over, they started to return, but after a day's journey, his parents discovered that Jesus was not among the group. So they returned to Jerusalem, and after searching the city for 3 days, they finally found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers and asking them questions. The teachers were amazed at his understanding. His mother rebuked him, saying, "Your father and I have been looking for you in great anxiety," to which Jesus replied, "Why were you searching for me? Do you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" They then returned to Nazareth. So that's all the childhood stories in the New Testament. But this lack of narrative creates a vacuum into which the literary imagination pours. Now, there's a pretty firm theological distinction between a Messiah, a human designated or anointed by God to lead the children of Israel to freedom from domination by the Gentiles, and incarnation of God himself. New Testament scholars today doubt that Jesus considered himself divine, and don't think that his followers did either, up until the Gospel of John made a case for his divinity. By the Council of Nicaea in 325, the Orthodox view had been pretty firmly established that Jesus was both fully divine and fully human. Unitarians classically consider Jesus human, and only divine in the sense that any of us is. Each of us, of course, is free to believe whatever we like about Jesus' nature. But this classic Unitarian view is why we love to say at Christmas time the words of Sophia Lyon Fahs, "Every night a child is born is a holy night." Okay, fine. But suppose you do have a God in the cradle, in the playpen, in the nursery, on the ball field. Would this be a holy joy or a holy terror? In the temple story in Luke, the author points out that Jesus was obedient to his parents after the temple incident. But in the stories that have come along since, he is anything but. How would you teach or discipline the most powerful being in the universe if he were sleeping in your house? This question occupies a very old text called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. This is not to be confused with the Gospel of Thomas, which I preached about before. Some scholars believe that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was originally composed about 150 CE, less than a century after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas is full of stories as Jesus as a child, of which I'm going to give you a few paraphrases. 1. After a rain shower, Jesus goes out and connects pools of water lying on the ground so that they float into one another. A boy who was son of the scribe Annas passed by with a willow branch, with which he disrupted the waterworks Jesus had made. Jesus turned to him and said, "What have you done? You will be as withered as the willow branch in your hand." And the child fell dead. Other children saw it and went to get the father of the dead child, who came to Joseph and accused him. Note that this story has some features of the song I sang earlier, which might have been derived from it. On another occasion, Jesus was playing with clay on the Sabbath, which was not lawful. He formed some sparrows. Another child saw this and told Joseph, who came to Jesus and rebuked him for doing this activity on the Sabbath. Jesus did not answer him, but rather said to the clay sparrows, "Go and take flight and remember me." And they all flew away, to Joseph's astonishment. On another occasion, a child threw a stone at Jesus, who said, "You will not finish your course." And the child died. People in the vicinity marveled at how everything Jesus said came true without his appearing to cause it. The parents came to Joseph and told him if he could not control his child, they would have to leave town. On another occasion, Jesus was among a group of people playing in a two-story house under construction, and some other children pushed one child off the top, and he died from the fall. The other children then ran away, and only Jesus was left there when the parents of the dead child arrived and accused Jesus of killing their child. Jesus leapt down from the top of the house to the head of the dead child and said, "Zeno, did I throw you down? Get up and tell the truth." And the child came back to life and said, "No, you didn't throw me down, but you did bring me back to life." There are other sets of infancy stories kicking around from ancient times. What are we to make of them? Apparently people love to think about what it would be really like for a child to have the power of a God. Now, the three classic attributes of God are that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good. From a modern perspective, we read these strange stories about Jesus, and it looks like he is all-powerful before he is all-good. He's all-powerful, but deficient as in morality, if he's going to kill a child because the child has disrupted the puddles in which he was playing. You have to ask, wouldn't it be better if his moral sense were developed before his supernatural powers? After all, this is how modern comic book superheroes roll. You can take a page from Superboy. All of us have been children, and some of us have raised children. And we know that a moral sense is in real life an evolving thing. Children are not born knowing right from wrong behavior. They learn this from adults. I certainly did. I looked up to my parents as my ethical guides until well into my teenage years. My parents used a carrot and stick approach with me, as I did with my children. But the stick was rarely physical, as it is in some of these old stories. It would have been a frightening thing. It would have to be a frightening thing to be Joseph, charged with disciplining this child with unlimited powers, when he could turn on his earthly father in a second. Does any of this have any relevance to you use today? You're asking at this point in the sermon. Many of us don't believe in any kind of God, and many of us reject a being with supernatural powers, which may be the same thing. Yet I think we can get some insight into the human condition from contemplating these old stories. While a sweet, innocent baby in the manger may be an object of veneration, a being with unlimited powers but the moral sensibilities of a 4-year-old would be a holy terror. And that terror would only increase as the child got older. To me, though, this points up a problem with the classic notion of God as unchanging and eternal. I don't think I can relate to a God whose morality is stuck in biblical times any more than I can relate to Jesus killing his playmates. I have a universalist faith in progress. I think we are better people, more empathetic, more responsible, more aware of the sufferings of others in the present age than we were a few decades ago, and better still than we were a few centuries ago. The God we want, the God we can relate to, is one who at least keeps up with the moral progress of the human race. God may be nothing more than our projection of what is right and what is wrong, a being we incarnate in our imaginations. But let's at least update that projection. As Jesus grows up to be a spiritual leader whose ethics speak to us across the centuries, God also